That's fabulous, isn't it? That's Cardinal Bertoni, that darling man who said that we're all basically the same as pedophiles. I put him up there for a reason, because to me, Cardinal Bertoni represents the old morality, whereby you've got a little list, most of it is clutched out of the Old Testament, some of it is out of the Western European tradition of just how you do things. Very little of it is based upon anything to do with Jesus. If you compare it to the Gospels, you would probably be shocked at how bankrupt this morality that most of us accept without thinking actually is. So I had dear old Cardinal Bertoni up there. And also, he looks outrageous. There he is, in his adorable Beretta, on that outrageous golden throne, with that fabulous lace rochet, telling us all that we're wicked people. Sorry, the irony was not lost on me. The point I'm trying to make today, which is not going to be an easy point, it's going to be something of a challenging point, is that really we know better. That what we grow up with as being morals, and especially sexual morals, is almost all of it bankrupt. And why do I say that? Because we haven't examined it. We've just received it from someone else's mouth. We've assumed that because we see it somewhere in the Bible, we're not always sure where in the Bible, well, that must be what we do, without asking, well, why do we do it? Because almost everything needs to be up for re-examination in the light of Christ. And a lot of what we've received, a lot of the burden that is on our backs, has never been up for re-examination in the light of Christ, in the light of Jesus. And let's start off with a person of Jesus, because to be honest with you, an awful lot of our behavior would be much better if we looked at the living person of Jesus first and foremost. Not what we believe we know supernaturally about Jesus and what came later. Let's look at the Gospels and what Jesus said and how he interacted with people. This is common ground we can have with anyone. They don't have to put the religious label upon themselves to see that what Jesus was suggesting was radical. Now, we use that term when describing Jesus and the Gospels a lot, but it seldom actually means anything. We seldom actually start being radical in our own lives. We seldom start being radical in what we are willing to believe about our own ethics, our own morals. How are we going to live our life without torturing ourselves, tearing ourselves to bits, or setting standards for ourselves which are inappropriate? How are we going to do that? Because, you know, before I start with the main body, I need to say a few words. I've been reading a bit of Nietzsche lately, and I always hated Nietzsche. I always thought Nietzsche was one of those philosophers who was arrogant and aggressive and anti-religious, and you know, he is. He is profoundly arrogant and profoundly aggressive and profoundly anti-religious, but that doesn't mean to say that he doesn't sometimes speak the truth. He has this to say about what he calls the ascetic church, and he obviously has the priesthood in mind, and the priesthood of the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church from where he was writing about, but this is a wider application. And he says that because they stand up and they point the way to Jesus Christ, but are unwilling to give real redemption, because they try to anesthetize the weak from the effects of the strong, but hundreds of years go by and the weak are in just as rich in a position as they were when they first started talking, they have to come up with a reason for this. Well, of course, the reason is that they are amongst the strong. They are amongst the oppressors. You cannot redeem the weak if you are one of the people who benefits from their oppression. So what do? Well, you have to turn around all their frustration, resentment, as it is called in philosophical circles, for the reasons why they are miserable, why they're feeling themselves oppressed, and because you can't do anything about it, because you are one of the oppressors, you have to turn it onto them. You have to turn it inside. You have to tell them that the reason they're miserable is themselves. And you have to so laden them with guilt that they will think that the reason they are oppressed and weak is because, well, it's because of me, isn't it? It's sin, it's all the things I've done wrong, it's my burdens. And eventually, or rather, they will never come to the conclusion that actually the reason is that somebody is taking most of my wages in taxation, or because I'm being oppressed by a landlord, or because Lord such and such is making my life miserable, or because the bishop is taking such a heavy tithe from my village that we can't feed my own people. No, that's not the reason why I'm oppressed. The reason I'm oppressed is because I did something wrong last week, or because I looked at that woman with a large bust. So Nietzsche says that basically the church has found a way of explaining its failure. Explaining its failure to bring about the sort of world that Jesus talked about. Explaining its failure to ever do anything that Jesus might have done. But instead to become the Pharisees and the Sadducees all over again. Because no bishop is ever going to preach themselves out of a good job. No pope is ever going to preach himself out of a good job and a palace and all the finery that we see. It's just not in their interests. It's too much to ask of people. Therefore, if you are attempting to anesthetize the weak, to send them to sleep so that they can live with their afflictions, the only way that you can explain why things have never got any better for them is by blaming the victim. And we've seen a bit of that just lately, haven't we? We have seen certain people in positions of spiritual power blaming the victims of abuse for their own abuse. We have seen that in the behavior of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church over the last few months. So I took that from Nietzsche and I thought, well, I don't like a lot of what you write, but you know, I think there's some painful truths in there. There's some truths which I need to have a look at. Somebody who was a representative of a state religion. I was a priest in the Church of England. We are part of the structure of state. The head of my church was also the head of my country, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. How on earth could we be the champions of social justice when the establishment was us? When bishops sit in the House of Lords, which is equivalent to the upper house of the British Parliament. They still sit there to this day, Anglican bishops, making decisions on the lives of ordinary people. You render yourself unable to be a voice for truth and morality. You render yourself unable to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. We ought to be proud and thrilled that nobody takes any notice of us. We ought to be delighted that we aren't asked to presidential banquets. We ought to be thrilled that people look down their nose at Metropolitan Community Church. We ought to be delighted that people think we are play church. We ought to be delighted, because once people start giving us that respect which is due to the religious authorities, we will see our voice being drowned out. We will see our chance to speak truth diminish until eventually we're just whispering in the darkness. Because I believe that in Jesus Christ we have to go back to first principles. Everything that we thought we knew about what was right and wrong, what was moral and what was immoral, has to be looked at through the teachings of that man 2,000 years ago in the Near East. If we don't do that, we may be a lot of things, but we cannot call ourselves Christians. We may call ourselves Christian as a sort of religion made up mostly of hocus pocus, but we cannot call ourselves followers of Jesus. And first and foremost, before we do anything else, before we get bogged down in all that religiosity, which is open to discussion, let's start by being followers of Jesus. Let's start by looking at what Jesus taught and wanted. Everything else is up for discussion. Everything else is religion. Jesus, first and foremost, was real flesh and blood. Jesus didn't teach doctrine. Jesus didn't teach dogma. Jesus didn't even prattle on about virgin births or anything like that. Jesus dealt with real human beings. And he dealt with them in a way that has echoed down the millennia. So do you know what I did?